Morning, ladies and gentlemen. For you guys, it's going to be like April 14th, but the actual date today is April 6th. This is the first day of spring break. Put that bad boy in air quotes for all-time futures. What have you been up to? Oh, that sounds like fun. What have I been doing? I've been reading Madeleine Albright's book, Fascism, A Warning. That's some interesting stuff. It's a good book, to be honest with you. I finished the latest season of Ozarks. That's a show on Netflix I like a lot. That is a hot show. It's edgy, a little scandalous. It earns its TV MA rating, so careful. Just started a new show called Counterpart over on Amazon Prime. One episode in. Let you know how that is along the way here, but spending more time with the family, trying to hone my Mario Kart skills. Still not that good, to be honest with you. Take my dog for some walks. We planted a vegetable garden the other day. We're trying to make the best of this very abnormal normalcy. All right, what's on tap, Holiday? Today we're going to talk about the presidency of Dwight David Eisenhower. Okay, in the study guide, we are going to pick up at the top of the second page. This is the Unit 8 study guide. Looking at the number of views on the first video, some of y'all might want to go watch the first video before you watch the second video so that you understand what the context of the moment is. Not saying, just saying. So that would help along the way. But this will be the second video that goes into Unit 8A. And I'm also putting out today, you'll see it, a schedule for where we're headed for the remainder of our time together now that the school districts and the county superintendents have said, that's it, we're not going back face to face. I thought it would be wise to say this is what the future looks like for us so you have a clear sense of things. I'll post that this morning. You'll get to see it. Otherwise, not much else to say to you. I hope you're all well, and let's dig into some Dwight Eisenhower. On the first slide, and this is the 9th slide of the Unit 8A 2020 PowerPoint, the 9th slide has a video on it. I said this in the last video, but in case you missed it or in case you forgot, there is a repository in Google Classroom of videos for the unit. Go watch the video. Pause me right now. Go watch the video. Pause. Watch the video. All right. Welcome back. Ike for president, Ike for president. I like Ike, you like Ike, everybody likes Ike for president. That is the first national television commercial for the presidency. 1952, the Republican Party trying to just kind of meet the new hip thing of the day, television. Black and white TV would have been making its way into suburban households. We'll talk more about that phenomenon in our 1950s societal video, which comes after this one. But for our purposes, that was the attempt of the Republicans to put forward this image of Dwight David Eisenhower, or as people called him, Ike. His younger brother, I beg your pardon, could not say the word Dwight. And so it would come out as Ike, and the name, or the nickname, if you like, stuck for the remainder of Ike's life. A little bit of background in case you don't know Eisenhower at all. He's a West Point graduate. He is probably the most well-regarded American military person of his day. He is absolutely lock solid. After World War II in 1948, Harry Truman, president, goes to Dwight Eisenhower and he says, Eisenhower, listen, if you run for president, I won't run for president. And Eisenhower says, no, I'm good. And in 1952, when Truman decided I'm no longer running for president, I'm done here, he goes to Eisenhower and says, I can get you the Democratic nominee. And the Republicans go to Eisenhower and say, we can get you the Republican nomination. In other words, both major parties courted Eisenhower. He was that well regarded. Now, has Eisenhower ever been elected to a job in his life? No, not one. He has never been a political figure before, but let's keep in mind, this is different. Don't come at me with the, oh my God, he's a total outsider. Don't come at me with that. George Washington, Andrew Jackson, Ulysses Grant. There are some smaller examples you could go with as well, but those are primary ones. William Henry Harrison would work. Zachary Taylor would work. Presidents who have been generals of the army are a standard American go-to in times of hustle and bustle. And Americans are in a moment of, what is going on around us? Harry Truman, we lost China, the Soviets got the bomb, Korea, get us off of the ride, Holiday. And so what you turn to in times of that kind of trouble is Dwight David Eisenhower, who at this point, we should point out, is a incredibly well-liked commander of NATO. He is viewed as being America's best sort of calming influence. He's a little bit older. He's in his early 60s. Now today, that would make him a spring chicken if he ran for president at 63. But for those purposes, during the period, that would have been considered a little bit older, but Eisenhower is going to be elected in 1952. He's going to get reelected in 1956. He is, by far, the most kind of foundational Republican of his day. Okay, he is going to try and push the business interests, but he's also going to commit America abroad in some instances. He is going to stand for less of the government spending we've had under the Democrats. Keep in mind, been a long while since a Republican won the presidency. How far long ago, Holiday? 1928, Herbert Hoover. It's been 24 years. It went Roosevelt, 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 and then kind of Truman, and then Truman. And now we've got Eisenhower for the first time. A couple things on the slide. If you're not looking at the slide, have a look at the slide. I got a picture of Eisenhower playing golf here. Eisenhower was the most golfing president in our history. Eisenhower played between 800 and 900 rounds of golf during his time in the Oval Office. He was gone a lot to play golf. He installed a putting green in the White House area. I don't want to say on the front lawn. It's not on the front lawn. It's kind of in the back. But nearly every day of his presidency, weather permitting, Eisenhower would slip on the golf spikes and head out back with a putter and a wedge and an 8-iron, and he would kind of work on his golf game. Was he a great golfer? Nah, he's kind of mid-range handicap golfer, but he loved to play golf. He is very well known for that. Who's in the picture with him, Holiday? That's his vice president, Richard Milhous Nixon, from the great state of California. Nixon, for his matter, is a rising star of the Republican Party, pretty well known for being an anti-communist. We'll talk about how that factors in big during today and next time's lesson. But Nixon is chosen because he is, let's be honest with it, a well-known anti-communist. That's something we want to stand for in our containment world, but also because he could deliver Western states like California. I want to point something out. If you look at the map, the electoral map, have a look there. Look at how much red there is in the South. Eisenhower's doing pretty well in what is considered to be a Democratic stronghold. The Democratic Party's hold on the South, which has been since Thomas Jefferson, is turning. And it's turning for a few reasons. Number one, we're starting to see the Democratic Party identify itself with civil rights and liberties, small things like that. We saw Truman in the Korean War integrate the Army. That was considered to be a controversial decision for a lot of hardcore people of the South. Also, the big government spending of the Democratic Party starting to chafe the wrong way against a lot of those Southern voices. So, for instance, random stats, but they're good fun. I read this the other day. I thought I'd share it with you. Eisenhower wins 7 former Confederate states and 48% of the vote in states that were a portion of the Confederacy when the Confederacy existed. That being the point that Eisenhower is expanding the Republican base of the South. That blue will eventually be red. It's not there yet. Give it 10 years, though, and we'll be turning that red here in a little while. All right, we're good with Eisenhower. We've sort of introduced the man. I do want to, one other note I made for myself to point out here, very fatherly, sort of calming. Eisenhower wants you to believe that everything's going to be okay. Everything's fine. And that's the image we have of the 1950s. We'll get into this more in our next video. But the 1950s are idolized, or idealized, I should say, in American politics and society as being this calming period. Sock hops, televisions, suburban houses, everybody's going to get a car, we're going to go to the drive-in, right? It's going to be this nice time on the surface, okay? My biggest problem with Eisenhower, not to get political, but my biggest problem with Eisenhower is he wants you to think that everything's all hunky-dory up here, and down at the bottom, we're doing some things. Eisenhower, you sneaky man. Let's go. On my study guide, as I look back here towards the left, now none of what I've just talked about for the last 10 minutes is something you have to have if you wrote it all down. My apologies, but hopefully you've gotten to know the Holiday. Let me give you some background on this person, and then we'll talk about them. The first slide is MAD, Mutually Assured Destruction. Eisenhower thinks the United States government is spending too much money on conventional military hardware. How do we counter that? Here's what we do. We spend more money on nuclear weapons. We ramp up the production of atomic weapons. Okay, the hydrogen bomb comes out in 1952. The Soviets quickly have their own, but that's far more powerful than the atomic bomb we dropped back in 1945, or bombs, I should say. And as a result of it, Eisenhower's thought is, if we spend money on this, the Soviets will not be able to be aggressive, right? That's the acronym here, MAD, Mutually Assured Destruction. We are going to put together such a nuclear stockpile that if you ever decide to shoot one at us, we will shoot so many of them at you that no one will live to tell. Okay? It is a method of playing defense by playing offense. We are going to ramp up our nuclear stockpiles. Now, it's a little tough to see it on the graph, but if you'll look at the slide closely, I'm going to look at mine for a moment, and my eyes are going to be down because I want to make the point on the slide. So play along. Eisenhower picks up the presidency just after 1950 there. At that point, the U.S. has roughly 1,000 weapons. 1,000. Now, how many do the Soviets have? Far fewer than that. Keep in mind, they only got the bomb in 49. So the Soviet stockpile is much less. You can see that on there. And notice, by the time that Eisenhower leaves office in 1960, or 61, I suppose, technically, January of 61, the United States is at roughly 20,000. The actual number is probably closer to 18,000. But that's a dramatic increase. What's the Soviet number there in the 1960s? Maybe 2,000. So Eisenhower has, kind of behind the scenes of the American people, built up this huge nuclear stockpile, and that is a deterrent to the Soviet Union. We're not going to tell them how many we have, because then we'll be afraid they'll try and match us. But we want them to realize that that's where we're putting a lot of our dollars, is into building those atomic weapons instead of putting them into conventional forces and committing American troops around the world into action. So, as I said earlier about Eisenhower, on the surface, it's calmer. The Korean conflict is going to come to a close in the first year of the Eisenhower presidency, 1953. The Soviets, as we'll see in a moment, are going to put on a friendlier face. And I want you, the American people, to have a look around and go, wow, we haven't had a Berlin airlift in a little bit. We haven't had the loss of China, the Soviets getting a new bomb. Everything seems a little bit more hush-hush. It's calm. Very nice. Very Eisenhower. That's what he wants, okay? Now, this next one here is the most Eisenhower-y Eisenhower program there is. Nothing speaks more to the way Dwight Eisenhower conducts foreign policy than what I'm about to show you here. This, to me, is why I'm not a huge fan of Dwight Eisenhower. Stuff like this. Covert interactions. All right. The United States is in the practice of funding capitalist-friendly leaders around the world. Okay? Now, the Soviets are as well for socialists. Let's not make this one-sided. The Soviet Union is pouring money into the pockets of socialist-friendly leaders around the world. Yes, the United States is pouring money into the pockets of capitalist-friendly leaders around the world. Yes, that is the third world writ large during the Cold War. Countries in Latin America, South America, Africa, Southeast Asia understand that if you start tilting one way or the other way, you can get money from one of the two big superpowers. They will pay you and arm you even if you're not necessarily under their control. And by under their control, I mean you're not necessarily a puppet. You're just leaning in a certain direction. It's going to get so bad here that countries will begin playing the United States and the Soviets against one another. Huh, what can you give me? This? They said they would give me this and that. What say you? So what you get here is this growing feeling of one-upmanship. Everyone understands that you can play these two parents, pardon me if the analogy is edgy here. You've got these two parents who are really kind of parenting in different ways, and the kids understand you can edge them against one another. Be like, I'm going to talk to Dad for a little bit here and be like, hey, Dad, Mom said. And you absolutely can run the parents against one another. Now, Eisenhower is going to take this to a level that is the next level, okay? Two examples in both Iran and Guatemala, and I pick these two, but trust me, the example works in Panama, in Egypt, in South Vietnam, as we'll see here in a moment, and in half a dozen other places around the world. We are going to go into areas that appear to be tilting left, and we are going to remove those leaders and replace them with leaders who tilt, or probably lean in a heavy way, to the right. So, for instance, in Iran, the guy who is the democratically elected leader of Iran, Mohammad Mossadegh, is a not socialist. What he really is an Iranian nationalist. And he nationalizes the oil fields that belong to the British and the United States. To understand what that means, okay, I'm going to borrow my book for a moment. This is the oil field. It used to belong to a foreign company, the Anglo-American Oil Company. And they were taking the profits out of that oil, and they were taking it back to their country, to Great Britain or to the United States. What nationalization means is the country where that land is, in this case Iran, comes in and says, that's in Iran. That belongs to Iranians. Iranians should benefit from that oil. Now, we are going to take it and use it to make money. And you could say, well, that makes perfect sense, Holiday. It's in their country. Yes. The infrastructure of development, though, the rigs, the pipelines, the millions of dollars or pounds that are put into making this oil field work, that belong to the foreign countries, and that's gone. So you can understand when countries are going to get upset about this, right? You get a pure sense of, that's not going to sit really well. And in Iran, when the democratically elected leader, Mossadegh, pulled the country towards nationalizing those oil fields, the United States said, oh, no, you don't. And they removed Mossadegh from power and installed an American-friendly leader called the Shah of Iran, a man who rules until the late 1970s. We'll be back to the Shah. Keep in my mind, put him in the back of your brain, because eventually this is going to fester. In 1979, when there's a revolution, a hard, religious, conservative revolution that overthrows the Shah of Iran, the vengeance is not just against that government itself, but it's against the United States of America. And the reason for that is because, quite frankly, people think you, America, got involved where you should not have been getting involved, and we hate you as well. You're looking for a fun movie to watch over the break? Go watch Argo, A-R-G-O. 10, 15 years ago, Ben Affleck directs this movie. A fantastic story of the breakdown of Iran in 1979. I'm not sure if it's Netflix, Amazon Prime, where you can find it. Probably a site that's illegal. Who knows? Argo, great movie. A-R-G-O. Give it a look. All right. Similar situation in Guatemala. In Guatemala, the elected president takes the fields of generally it's bananas. It's fruit, but bananas is the big crop. And he expropriates or nationalizes those fruit fields and makes them into nationally owned Guatemalan fields instead of belonging to a company called U.S. Fruit, which had owned those fields for decades. That alarms the United States. We go in with the help of the CIA, the Central Intelligence Agency. We remove Arbenz Guzman from power, and then we install a U.S.-friendly leader. And the reason I say that this bothers me a little bit about Eisenhower is that down the road, this causes problems. When you go into a country and you prop up a hard-wing military leader, somewhere down the road, there's going to be a liberal revolution that opposes it. Someone's going to say, wait a second, we don't need a right-wing military dictator. We need freedom and love and Thomas Jefferson. And the problem is then they start quoting your country's ideas in order to oppose the guy that you put into power. Dicey. Right now, the Soviets are doing the same thing. Let's not in any way cloud it to be like the Soviets are running some tea party. They are taking out people as well. And when I say taking out, Holiday, do you mean they attack them? In some cases, yes. People are being removed from power by really incidental heart attacks in the middle of the night, or they just happen to kick the bucket. Yes, people are being assassinated by the Soviets, by the United States. The Cold War is crazy. Getting involved in the internal politics of countries like this is supposed to be illegal. It's specifically against the United Nations Charter. You're not supposed to do these sorts of things, but both sides are playing a game that they see as being absolute brinkmanship. And by brinkmanship, I mean that they feel they cannot lose a single time. that the record has to be, whatever the number is, and 0. It cannot be and 1, we lost 1, and 6, we lost 6. It can't be that. It has to be perfect. And that means that we have to go into places and we have to be as cutthroat, I beg your pardon, and as ruthless as the Soviets are going to be. Eisenhower is not going to tell anyone about these things, right? The American people are busy sock hopping and happy daysing and going down to McDonald's to get a burger. And they're like, oh man, this is so much better than when Truman was around. And meanwhile, Eisenhower is sitting there just doing some things. Understandable, he probably had to do these things, but it's a bit skulky. Okay, enough with covert interactions. Over now to the next slide, okay? Now, at the bottom of this slide, I have a video, and I'd like you to stop me for a moment and go watch this video. Okay, so let me set this video up for a moment. The video is an interaction between then Vice President Nixon and the leader of the Soviet Union, the new one, Nikita Khrushchev. Khrushchev is the leader of the Soviet Union after the death of Joseph Stalin. Now, with Stalin, you understood what you were going to get. A maniacal, ruthless, bloodthirsty loon who really did not care about killing millions of people. With Khrushchev, you're not quite sure what you get. Khrushchev is a little bit of a wild card. He's a committed socialist, an absolute 100% the Soviet Union is a good idea socialist. And in the clip you're going to watch, he comes up against Richard Nixon, who's a hardline, anti-communist, straight-laced kind of American thinker. Now, you will notice in the clip that Khrushchev is much more charismatic. Nixon is a wooden human being compared to Khrushchev. Nixon is standing there trying to crack jokes and make some funny things, and Khrushchev's like, "Aya, aya, aya." He's got a fun-looking hat on. Aya. Where are they, Holiday? They're in Moscow for an event called the World's Fair. Now, in the year that this happens, bizarrely, the World's Fair was held in 2 places as an attempt to sort of lessen the tensions between the United States and the Soviet Union. Both sides hosted that year. So there was an exhibition in the spring in New York City, and then in the summer in Moscow. Here's how this works. Every country in the world sends an exhibit that says, this is what we make. So for instance, say my fictional country makes pens, right? And I send this exhibition of pens, and people are like, oh man, Holidayland, sweet pens. The Soviets send to New York that year an exhibition that includes rockets, satellites, computer military technology. This is what they're good at. And give them their fair play. They're better than we are at this. So they send all of this stuff out, and we look at it in New York, and the intent is to frighten, and it does its job. Okay, more on that in a moment. When it becomes our turn to send something to the Soviet Union, the United States sends a kitchen. That's right, a kitchen. With a fridge, and a stove, and a range. No microwave yet. Okay, but a blender and a toaster oven, probably a regular toaster too. And we send that out to the people of the Soviet Union and say, look at that kitchen, right? Because you might think that that's not very Cold War, but that is absolutely Cold War. The Cold War, behind all the missiles and the covert interactions and the Truman Doctrine and whatnot, the Cold War is really about one central question. Do your people live a better life than my people? There it is. Can you provide a better life? How do you organize wealth in your society? How many people are poor? What things do people have that identify the standard of living? And when the United States sends you a kitchen, what we're saying is, we have so much. We can build rockets. We can fund countries around the world. And the average American has a kitchen like this. And we're looking at the Soviets and we're saying, do you? That's the real question. At the heart of the Cold War, is your standard of living as high as ours? If it isn't, admit it and say, frankly, you lost. So we send them a kitchen. Okay? And the video you're going to watch involves Nixon and Khrushchev debating the pros and cons of communism and capitalism over the basic underlying kitchen of America. Okay, so pause me just here. You're back. If you were with me last year, you probably saw the same video. Maybe you remember it, maybe you don't. But it's kind of a fun video that shows both of the men in their element, Nixon not very elemental, unfortunately, and Khrushchev just hamming it up about how he's going to pass us and wave goodbye to us and say, ah, ha, 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 we got you. Okay? Khrushchev is to America a little bit of a change of course. When he becomes the premier of the Soviet Union, returning now to the slide that says here, Nikita Khrushchev, peaceful coexistence. When he becomes the leader of the Soviet Union, Khrushchev promises that it won't be like Stalin. It won't be repression. It won't be satellites of the Soviet Empire that are crushed by the boot of the Soviet heel. It will not be that way. It will be better. We will make consumer goods. We'll let you speak your mind. We will let the countries that live behind the Iron Curtain run their own politics. That was my son laughing. Maybe he thought that Khrushchev was being funny. In the long run, that was a well-timed laugh, Ian, because the Soviet Union really doesn't mean this. Because let's look at what happens very quickly. In 1956, after Khrushchev says, you can rule yourself, one of the countries of the Soviet Empire, Hungary's like, we'd like to rule ourselves. And for about 2 weeks, they ruled themselves, and then the Soviets sent the tanks and said, we kind of didn't mean it, and crushed them. Did people get more consumer goods? No, that's always a problem for the Soviet Union. This sort of a system doesn't work as readily as the one in the United States. It's unfortunate, but it's definitely true. So as much as Khrushchev has said, this is going to be different, it isn't. The great line of the Khrushchev premiership for foreign policy is peaceful coexistence. And it's an interesting new take on the Cold War. Khrushchev's policy is this: we disagree. So what? Doesn't mean you can't have your world and we can't have ours. You do your things and we'll do ours. We disagree. There's no need to crush one another. Khrushchev would look us in the eye and say, you guys are idiots. You've been here 200 plus years. We've only been here 60 years and we're better than you are. 50 years, sorry, that's a little exaggeration there, Khrushchev. But Khrushchev is going to say to the United States of America, we're better than you are. And the reason is our beliefs are better than your beliefs. But we don't need to destroy you because of them. So there's this easing of tensions. Now, look back, if you will, at the production of atomic weapons. That doesn't speak to the easing of tension, Holiday. They seem to be going at it as hardcore as ever. Eisenhower behind the scenes, whacking world leaders and putting other people in charge. I don't know if that's an easing of tension. From 1958 to 1961, both sides agreed to not test atomic weapons for a period of 3 years. They did, and then in 1961, they began testing and building again. But there's a little bit of a sign. Americans are scared in the 1950s, and it's a legitimate fear. The Soviets are whooping us in the space race. They put Sputnik up into the air before we do. It's something we've been trying to do, and they did it more quickly than we did. Notice they got the bomb faster than they were supposed to. They got the hydrogen bomb the same year we did, and they got into space before we did. We're losing here, and Eisenhower realizes it. Eisenhower's response is a push towards math and science education. That's what we need. We need some more money towards the STEM subjects, Eisenhower. STEM! Pardon me. Just a little bit of vitriol there. Did Eisenhower say we should study history more? No, he didn't. Thanks, Ike, ya punk. We should study math and science more. And in a sincere sense, this is the beginning of the American push to try and be the world's greatest maker, producer, thinker on a scientific mathematic level. And we do so, right? We get up in space eventually, and we start doing things the Soviets can't, and we get to the moon. Now, if you're a we didn't go to the moon person, okay, it's a debate for another day. But we have a series of space shuttles, and we really do some great space things. But in the 1950s, we were losing there. And Eisenhower says, no, we're not going to lose that aspect of the space race, right? Think about, you ever watch Star Trek? Maybe you've never seen Star Trek in your life. But the beginning of Star Trek has a line. It says, space, the final frontier. And that's really a Cold War ideology. It's the one last piece of ground, in a weird sense, that we can't lose to the Soviets. We need to get ourselves out there and take it back. Okay? And Eisenhower wants that to happen, okay? So I've bounced around here a fair bit, but hopefully you get this idea that under Khrushchev, America thought this would be more peaceful, it will be more predictable, and in some ways it was, and in some ways it was not. We will see Khrushchev again in about 3 videos when he returns for our video on the presidency of John F. Kennedy. And then he shows himself to be at sometimes wonderful, understanding, and almost dominating a situation, and at other times, cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs, okay? Let's go back to Vietnam for a moment, okay? Vietnam is the last of our slides for the day. Pardon me as I push my slide up here, okay? If you remember, if you saw the first video, Vietnam was a place that America was not specifically in, but we were helping out the French with their mission there, and it's going poorly. By 1952-53, the French say to the United States, listen, we're losing. You need to do one of 2 things. Number 1, you need to send in a bucket of troops like you did in Korea, or you need to send atomic weapons in. And Eisenhower, who is president by this time in 1953, says, on number 1, no thank you. And on number 2, absolutely no thank you. No. And here's what we're going to do. In 1954, the French pick up and go, admitting that this exercise in colonialism was a waste of their time and our money. Thanks, France. Appreciate that one. Okay. And as a result of it, the United States is put into a quandary. You could walk away at this point. You could pack up your bags and go back to the United States of America and say, you know what? It's a small sliver of Southeast Asia. It really isn't that big of a deal. And Eisenhower's opinion is, no, we're not losing anywhere. I don't care how small it is. I don't care how many people it is. We are not losing any area to the Soviets, to the communists, to the Ho Chi Minh followers, whatever you want to phrase it, the people of the communist empire. The dominoes are falling, and America will not be held asleep at the switch. That's right. We're going to fight this. So here's what we're going to do. There's an agreement made in 1954 to divide the country in 2 parts. That's what you can see in the map. There's what's meant to be kind of a reddish pinkish area at the top, and then a green area in the bottom. The northern portion of Vietnam is going to be dominated by the socialist forces of Ho Chi Minh. The southern portion of it is going to be dominated by the United States. Now, in 1956, we're supposed to have an election. This is the rule. In 2 years, after we educate the people about democracy, we're going to have an election. And that election will unite the country into one. That border that I'm seeing over here will go away. I'd point to it down here, but it's in black and white. Okay? Over there, it's in color. That border will go away. And there will be one country. 1956 rolls around. We're not going to let that happen. Here's the problem. If we have an election right now, we're going to lose. Ho Chi Minh is more popular. The people who flock to the U.S.-supported government of the South are a minority of folks. The fellow that we look to in charge in the South, and I know it's going to seem an odd name to pronounce, but I'll point to it as I say it here, is No Din Diem. Holiday, that's a D, not a Z. I get it. Diem. The Diem government is a government that really has a lot of un-Vietnamese-like characteristics to it. For instance, Diem himself is not a hardcore Vietnamese person. Born in Vietnam, raised in the United States, educated in the United States. That's a strike. Diem is a Catholic. Catholicism is the religion of the oppressive colonizers' France, not Buddhism, the native religion of the people of Vietnam. That's another strike. Okay? Diem's regime also seems to curry favor with a lot of big landowners, and really the people who are flocking to the support of Ho Chi Minh in the north are small landowners who've been convinced that if a socialist revolution takes place in the whole country, you'll have socialism, you'll have land reform, where land is handed out to all of the different members, especially the poorer members of the society. And as a result of that, the Diem regime is not very popular. This is, though, go back a couple slides, this is Eisenhower foreign policy. Find a guy who we can trust, who supports our ideas, and prop him up. Put money behind him. Put influence behind him. Put guns behind him. All of that in an effort to assure that the place doesn't tilt too far to the left. That's very much the ideal. Thank you, son. You're welcome. Social distancing. Responsibly, though. Okay? Back to ZM. Prop up ZM, that's the Eisenhower idea, but do it in such a way that in doing so, you hopefully speak to the future of the country, a country that is going to be, as best as possible, leaning towards the right and not the left. Okay, we decide not to hold the elections. Instead, the United States becomes the permanent supervisor, if you will, of the southern portion of Vietnam. We're going to send in military advisors, as you can read here. We're going to spend a fair chunk of money. This is more than we were spending when France held the territory. But Eisenhower is committed to America staying in South Vietnam. What's his goal, Holiday? I don't know. Can we win back the North? Not really. By this point, Ho Chi Minh is accepting money from both China and the Soviet Union, who see North Vietnam as a fantastic thorn in the side of the United States. So it's not likely that we're going to be able to win. That's my lovely wife who just phased through the background. Give the people a wave, Rosemary. There it is. There it is. There it is. She is roaming through. Okay. So if I'm Eisenhower, I'm hoping we can at least hold this bottom part. I don't have much of a hope that we can win over the North, but it's willingness, I should say, to stay here that keeps us there, that makes us, as an American foreign policy, committed to the people of South Vietnam. There's one more slide here. If you'll go to it, it's sort of a graphic slide, and I apologize for propping it right at you here without any kind of an explanation. But the slide, I think, is an excellent representation of how we've gone wrong in Vietnam already. And this is probably one of the most famous photos of the 20th century. If you're a Rage Against the Machine fan, this is one of the album covers. Perhaps you've seen it in some other light. But this is the self-immolation of Thic Quang Duc. Thic Quang Duc and a number of Buddhist monks, the final number is almost 20 of them, over the course of the late 1950s, commit the act of self-immolation in protest against the ZM government of the South. Self-immolation, Holiday? They set themselves on fire. So, as an act of civil disobedience, these Buddhist monks who are mad at the Catholic-leaning regime of ZM set themselves in the middle of the busy intersection, right? Imagine something like California and Oak, right? Or right there by campus, Chester and California. That's a busy intersection. Their helpers kind of stop the traffic. You sit down in the lotus position, you douse yourself in gasoline, and you set yourself on fire as a civil act of disobedience against the regime that we're supporting, right? When this image gets back to the United States, you would want it to be that these are the guys who are cheering for us, and they're not. They are protesting against the regime that we're supporting. They are saying this regime is attempting to squash the policies, the religion in particular, of the indigenous people here of Vietnam. It's a bad regime. And American policymakers, unfortunately, are so Cold War committed that we will not walk away from the people of South Vietnam. Now, in all fairness, the people of South Vietnam, at least the policymakers, want us there. They want us there in order to avoid the socialist onslaught from the North. If I'm a landowner, a business owner, if I'm someone who has wealth in South Vietnam, I know what socialism brings. It probably brings me dead, my money gone, and all of my possessions taken by a regime, right? Ho Chi Minh can sit here and tell you that he's about the people of South Vietnam, that he's here in order to help the poor farmer. But Americans would point to every other socialist expropriation worldwide. They would say, look at what happened to property owners in the early Soviet Union. Look what happened to those who were prosperous in East Germany, in Czechoslovakia, in Poland. All of those people ended up dead, and everything they owned gone. So you can spell me this idea of the socialist utopia, Ho Chi Minh, but I have a right to be fearful of you. And the people of South Vietnam are fearful of him. And they cling to the support of the ZM regime and to the United States of America. Now, in the long run, this is not an area we're going to have a lot of success with. It would have been great if that's something we could have realized early on, but unfortunately, the Cold War is a tricky, tricky puzzle, and we haven't quite figured it out. when we're sitting here in the late 1950s. So Eisenhower's support for the Diem regime is going to continue. Events like this should have been a signal that said to the United States of America, your foreign policy is seriously misguided. You need to come up with something that, while supportive of the people of South Vietnam, is not viewed as being colonial oppression. Because as I said in my last video, the Vietnamese are great at resisting colonial oppression. They had resisted the Chinese, the Japanese, the French, and now America is just version 6.0, or whatever you want to call it, okay? Enjoy your day, ladies and gentlemen. Take care of yourselves. We'll talk again soon.